Not long after Pearl Harbor, Japanese parachute forces launched an attack on the island of Sumatra. Months before the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the Second World War, Japan was preparing an all-out Pacific invasion. Japan's survival depended on importing natural resources and raw materials for its industry, including rubber, tin, iron, and most importantly, oil. The Japanese military machine also relied heavily on these supplies. Japan had previously won a brief war against China from 1894 to 1895, gaining control of Formosa, a portion of Korea, and a small part of Manchuria, along with their natural resources. After Japan's victory over Russia in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, the Empire of the Sun seized control of all Korea and part of Manchuria, which Russia had earlier controlled. In the midst of a global economic downturn on September 19, 1931, Japan staged an incident at a train station on Manchuria's Korean border, which it used as justification to invade the mineral-rich Chinese province. Japan withdrew from the League of Nations after the League denounced this act and abandoned the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty to expand its navy. In 1936, Japan began a full-scale invasion of China, and in July 1937, claiming that Japanese troops in Manchuria had been fired upon by Chinese soldiers, Japan seized control of nearly all major port towns and the raw materials entering and exiting China by 1939, though it could not conquer the entire country. After Japan invaded French Indochina in June 1940, when the Nazis were occupying France, the U.S. enacted the Shipment Control Act, forbidding the shipment of strategic minerals, chemicals, aircraft engines, parts, and equipment to Japan, although crude oil was not initially included. When Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in September 1940, relations with the U.S. worsened further. Hitler hoped the pact would encourage Japan to attack British assets in the Far East, encircling Allied forces as Germany prepared for war in Europe. Japan planned to seize the lucrative oil fields of the Netherlands East Indies, believing the pact would offer security during this time. The U.S. responded by embargoing iron, copper, and brass, but President Franklin D. Roosevelt stopped short of banning oil sales. Japan secured its northern border by signing a 5-year non-aggression treaty with Russia. By spring 1941, Japan increased its troops in French Indochina and showed interest in the Netherlands East Indies. In response, Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in the U.S. and eventually imposed an embargo on crude oil. The Dutch also stopped selling oil to Japan after the American embargo. Before taking control of the oil fields, Japan needed to destroy British strongholds in Singapore, eliminate American forces in the Philippines, and severely damage U.S. military power. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, Northern Malaya, Thailand, Guam, Wake Island, and Midway. They also prepared to seize the island of Sumatra, east of Java, targeting nearby oil refineries and a vital airfield. The Japanese army began experimenting with airborne forces in December 1940, training its first volunteers in Ichigaya, near Tokyo. Volunteers, mostly aged 20 to 25, had to pass strict medical, psychological, and physical assessments and undergo rigorous training similar to commando exercises, based on the belief that paratroopers needed cat-like agility for secure landings. Training moved to an entertainment park in Tokyo that featured a 165-foot parachute drop, where trainees disguised as university students made simulated descents, keeping the unit's existence secret. Exercises included somersaults, tumbling, jumping from various heights, and actual jumps from moving planes. The initial group of about 250 was divided into cats to integrate new recruits. After sufficient training, the 1st Paratrooper Brigade was formed under Colonel Seichi Kum, consisting of the 1st and 2nd Regiments and Brigade headquarters. By January 1942, the brigade was assigned to an air transport group with its own aircraft, different from a standard infantry regiment of 3,800 troops, as each regiment had roughly 700 men, including rifle companies, an engineer company, and headquarters. The Army was ready for the Sumatra parachute drop by late December 1941, but on January 3, 1942, a fire aboard the cargo ship carrying the 1st Regiment to an airfield on the Malay Peninsula forced paratroopers to abandon ship without parachutes, gear, or weapons. Exhausted and damaged, they could not perform the drop. Stranded on Hainan Island off the northern coast of French Indochina, the Imperial Army General Staff called on Major Cura and his 2nd Regiment, still organizing but with about 450 paratroopers fully equipped. The 2nd Regiment left Kyushu on January 15th and arrived in Phnom Penh, Cambodia on February 2nd to prepare for airstrikes on the Palembang airstrip and oil refineries. This regiment split into 2 attack groups. The 1st Flying Regiment used various aircraft to drop about 350 men from the 1st group on February 14th, with the 2nd group of 90 men dropped the next day. Cargo containers holding machine guns, rifles, ammunition, and supplies were dropped separately by bombers. Paratroopers were anxious since, if the supplies were missed or delayed, they would face a well-armed enemy with only pistols and grenades. Fighter aircraft escorted the drop, and light bombers dropped anti-personnel bombs over the Dutch airfield beforehand. By February 13th, the entire attack force moved from Cambodia to the west coast of the Malay Peninsula. The 2nd attack group marched to Suapatani, while the 1st group assembled near recently captured Allied airfields. They prepared for an early morning arrival at Palembang, Sumatra's capital, with over 108,000 residents, located 50 miles inland on the Musi River. Its oil fields were considered the best in Southeast Asia. 2 oil refineries stood 4 miles east of town, separated by the Searing River. The Netherlands Colonial Petroleum Refinery was on the east bank, and the Shell Oil-owned refinery was on the west bank. The latter was constructed as 2 independent units on either side of the river. The Dutch, predicting Japanese intentions, chose not to destroy the refineries immediately. There was also a new military airfield, P2, 40 miles south, and a civilian airfield, P1, 8 miles north of Palembang. P1 had a control tower, barracks, and a concrete runway used by civilian aircraft. The Japanese knew about P1, but P2 was cleverly hidden with a dirt runway camouflaged by forest, making it unknown to them. Palembang served as the British Royal Air Force headquarters on Sumatra. In mid-January, the RAF stationed 6 fighter and bomber squadrons at both airfields. The refineries produced high-quality aviation gasoline, fueling numerous sorties against advancing Japanese forces. Lieutenant Colonel Inyu Vliesang of the Royal Netherlands. East Indies Army commanded the region around Palembang, with about 110 troops from the South Sumatra Garrison Battalion and 2 outdated armored trucks guarding P1. There were more airmen than aircraft due to Japanese attacks destroying planes on the ground. A makeshift ground defense force was formed from 72 grounded Royal Australian Air Force airmen and 3 officers, though they lacked proper training and firearms. Colonel Vogel Sang commanded 8 stationary 75mm field cannons, 1 Home Guard infantry company, and a machine gun company of regulars guarding the town and oil refineries. Additional heavy and light anti-aircraft regiments arrived from Singapore on February 2nd, bringing 16 heavy 3.7-inch and 16 light AA guns, but their ability to engage was limited because the ship carrying much of their ammunition had been sunk. For river defense, Colonel Sang had a Royal Netherlands Navy mine layer and 2 patrol boats to oppose any Japanese advance up the Musi River and to monitor river traffic continuously. The Dutch, British, and Aboriginal defenders could only wait as the 2 refineries and airfields were targeted by the 2nd Regiment as part of the Japanese plan. The Japanese aimed to capture the refineries intact. Around 180 men from Major Cura's 2nd Regiment headquarters, signal unit, and rifle companies would land 3.5 miles southeast of the airfield. Another group of 60 men would land just west of P1. These 240 men would advance and seize control of the airfield. Meanwhile, 60 troops would be dropped near the Shell oil refinery and 39 men near the Standard Oil facility. Colonel Cura and some staff would crash-land their transport between the airfield and Palembang. After landing, the paratroopers were to secure the airfield and both refineries, holding until reinforcements arrived by sea and advanced up the Musi River. The reinforcements consisted of 1 battalion each from the 230th and 229th Infantry Regiments, arriving by barge to charge up the river. Until then, only about 90 men from the 3rd Company, arriving by parachute on the 2nd day, would support the paratroopers. Maintaining control would be difficult until reinforcements arrived. A British spy plane spotted the invasion convoy near Banga Island on February 10th, correctly guessing it was headed for Palembang. The British attacked the Japanese ships several times over the following days and nights. By February 14th, the Dutch, British, and local forces around Palembang were well aware of Japanese intentions. The only operational aircraft at P-15 Hawker Hurricane fighters were initially sent to escort 2 flights of RAF bombers from P-2, preparing for assaults against the approaching Japanese convoy. Around 8:30 a.m., transports carrying paratroopers of the 2nd Raiding Regiment began taking off from Malay airfields. 55 planes were en route to launch an air attack on Sumatra. An Allied observation post detected the Japanese when they were still 100 miles from Palembang, and the information was sent immediately to P1. At P1, Air Commander Esta Vincent, commanding one of the RAF squadrons, acted quickly by arranging for rifles and ammunition to be issued and warning the airfield defense officer to expect a paratroop assault. Unfortunately, there were not enough firearms for everyone. Only 60 airmen were armed to assist 200 regular soldiers defending the airstrip. Almost 3 hours after takeoff, at 11:20 a.m., Japanese planes arrived at the mouth of the Musi River. They silently flew past some outbound British bombers, following the river almost directly south without deviating. British anti-aircraft weapons at the oil refineries and airfield opened fire as the Japanese planes approached their targets. 1 man was killed and several others injured when a shell burst near a British anti-aircraft gun. Japanese fighter aircraft began strafing the area after barracks and airport buildings were bombed. At 11:26 a.m., 18 transport planes descended at about 600 feet and began dropping around 180 paratroopers southeast of the airfield. Fighters and bombers were engaged in combat overhead. Almost simultaneously, 6 more transports began unloading 60 soldiers from the 1st and 2nd platoons of the 2nd Rifle Company west of the airfield. Suddenly, a flight of 15 Hurricanes and a few Lockheed Hudson bombers, having recently attacked the Japanese invasion convoy to the north, appeared above the airstrip. As they descended through heavy clouds, British pilots spotted the enemy below. Low on fuel, the fighters immediately attacked while the bombers proceeded toward P2. Pilot Officer Bill Lockwood and his wingmen came out of the clouds and targeted the lead Japanese bomber, shooting it down. As Lockwood and his wingman descended through rain, they followed the Musi River back to Palembang. Upon approaching P1 a second time, Lockwood noticed white objects on the ground and realized Japanese paratroopers were about to launch an attack. His wingman fired a red flare from P1, signaling not to land, so they continued to P2. The paratroopers dropped southeast of the airstrip in a small, tree-covered area about 2 miles from P1. Disorganized, they began moving toward the airstrip in small isolated groups with scattered supplies. Some carried only pistols and hand grenades. Lieutenant Minoru Okamoto led a platoon of paratroopers from the 4th Rifle Company who were scheduled to land at the southeast drop zone. But they were unable to exit their aircraft due to a jammed door. Instead, they landed about 4 miles south of the drop zone, near the main road connecting Palembang and the airstrip. Armed only with pistols and explosives, Okamoto gathered 4 other men and headed north toward P1. They cut telephone lines between the town and the airstrip during their movement. Although aerial photos showed flat terrain covered with low grass, the 60 soldiers of the 1st and 2nd platoons fell into dense 6-foot-high reeds west of the airstrip. Small groups of paratroopers, armed only with grenades and pistols, moved east toward the airfield. Unable to find their cargo containers, Lieutenant Heroes pressed on toward P1 with only 2 other men. After the Japanese aircraft departed, Dutch and British defenders held their ground firmly, not yielding any advantage to the enemy. Ground personnel and aircrew without rifles used Browning machine guns from non-operational aircraft, positioning them on earth mounds. Crews manning the boats and 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns fired horizontally over open sights. The defenders engaged the first Japanese paratroopers reaching the airfield. Over the next hour, numerous paratroopers scattered widely, arriving in small groups or pairs, some having retrieved rifles from the dispersed cargo containers. They climbed trees on the south side of the airstrip and shot at the men operating the anti-aircraft guns. The snipers then dispersed, and the airfield grew very quiet. Having landed miles from the field, most paratroopers struggled to gather their equipment and move toward P1. A group of Dutch officers, unable to contact headquarters due to cut telephone lines, decided to withdraw and began pulling the 200 defenders from P1. Taking advantage of the lull before the expected assault, British artillerymen started removing their anti-aircraft guns. Some men prepared to burn a stack of 44-gallon drums of aviation fuel, and others planned to destroy unserviceable planes. Only 2 firearms could be relocated due to the availability of a single prime mover vehicle after the sabotage of other guns. 2 crews began moving the remaining 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns, while most men headed toward Palembang. Lieutenant Okamoto and his small group, dropped far south of the airfield because of the jammed door, soon began firing on retreating vehicles. Although some retreating officers and men escaped via the main road south toward Palembang, about 4 miles from the airfield, Okamoto set up an ambush at a bend in the road, increasing his force to around 20 men. A 6-wheeled truck was attacked with hand grenades and pistol fire, flipped over, and blocked the road. The next vehicle, driven by Johnny Johnson Rath, was ambushed when he turned the corner. Johnson ran out of ammunition and surrendered after escaping his car and firing a handgun from a roadside ditch, reportedly hitting 2 paratroopers. The Japanese commander took Johnson's revolver, shot him in the thigh to prevent escape, and just as it seemed the paratroopers might kill him, a second vehicle approached from P1.